Welcome to Leadership for God's Future, service on the Congregational Council. This session is being recorded, and these sessions are co-sponsored between Briarwood Leadership Center, where I'm the director, and Northern Texas, Northern Louisiana Synod of the ELCA, under the leadership of Bishop Eric Gronberg, and the technical leadership of Jason O'Neill. So thank you so much, Jason, for being the tech Lord behind the scenes here. I'm just going to keep adding titles to you, Jason.
It's a lot to live up to.
Indeed, it is. And so others, of course, will be logging in. As Connie was saying, it was 78 degrees here in Northern Texas today, here on December 2nd of 2021. So I'm shocked anybody's here. Shouldn't we all be outside just kind of walking around dazed, staring at this weather? But here we are because we are committed to lay leadership in our congregations as the foundational building block of a Lutheran congregation. And I'm so pleased to be in this conversation with you after so many delays. This series has had challenges with scheduling and technical difficulties, but we are here tonight with Jerry Gray, who is the bookkeeper at Briarwood and is I'll let Jerry introduce himself and his qualifications, but I know highly skilled in accounting and auditing, but I won't claim any particular certifications in case they have lapsed. I don't know. So I will let Jerry introduce himself, but thanks to all of you for your presence here tonight. And Jerry, I will hand it over to you for an initial presentation, and then maybe some conversation afterwards. And we're a small enough group, we'll just open it up for the questions and insights and resources and gifts that each of you bring to this conversation as well. So welcome everyone. Jerry, take it away.
Okay, I'm gonna, excuse me, share my screen because I put together a little PowerPoint, and in the midst of that early on, I'll do an intro of myself. Let's see if I can make this work right. Participants can now see. Can you guys see that? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
So I've got the title on there. We know why we're here. We're going to talk about who's afraid of Virginia Woolf or budgets. I did leave the original date in there just to take responsibility because it was my fault. I was out running around trying to do a favor for my daughter's boyfriend and got a little careless. And in my haste to get home, I kind of ran up on a curb and had a blowout on one of my tires. Never done that in my entire life. So it was really odd that it had to happen on November 11th, but no damage to anybody except had to get 2 new tires. But nobody got hurt, no real accident. But I do apologize for having messed that up. I should have just stayed home that afternoon. So that's me. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I worked for the federal government for the Department of Defense for 35 years. I was a CPA at the time. To Robert's point, my license has lapsed. I don't really need to have a license to do the books at Briarwood. I don't think. Maybe somebody would argue that, but like some of my friends probably would argue it. They used to tell me before I got my license that I was holding myself out as a CPA, and I said, that's totally not true. I had passed the exam when I was 23 years old, but I never got a license for about another 10, 15 years because I didn't need one. But I did finally get a license. So I had a license for several years. I also have a master's degree in administration. So in that time working for the government, we did audits of companies who make stuff, primarily weapon systems. So I had auditors at Lockheed in Fort Worth. I had auditors at Lockheed and Grand Prairie. I had the staff at Bell Helicopter, Boeing in St. Louis, Boeing World Headquarters in Chicago, some Raytheon locations, some Northrop Grumman locations, pretty much all of the major defense contractors at certain locations over the years. I also spent 5.5 years doing top secret work, which was really interesting because that work was across the countryside. So I had to go from Pennsylvania to Virginia to Florida to California to Colorado. I only was around here about 1 week every 6. So a lot of experience with the government. Outside of that, I retired in 2016. And prior to that, I've done several things at Faith Lutheran. Been treasurer a couple times, so I did budgets there. Most recently, I've been doing more work on stewardship side, do all kinds of things over at Faith. And I've been at Briarwood since the middle of 2016, first in a voluntary role. And then for the last few years, I thought, yeah, maybe I should ask for a little compensation. Not much. I mean, I don't think, not working that many hours, but something that I think makes me a little more accountable and responsible. So that's a little bit about me. Robert, of course, is the host, and I didn't realize we were going to be blessed with Jason, so I didn't put Jason on here. I'm sorry. I could have tweaked this 10 minutes ago, but so I guess we're being hosted by Robert and Jason. How's that? And you guys all know Robert. Robert, do you want to say anything about yourself, or does everybody know you?
Well, I'm not sure if if everybody knows me, but I am on staff as an associate to the bishop in NTL Synod and the director of Briarwood Leadership Center and the bridge pastor at Central Lutheran Church, which is merging with Bethany Lutheran Church in Northeast Dallas. So we have at least one member of Central on this call today. And one thing to know about me is that I don't math very well. I've worked with budgets throughout my professional career, but I'm always grateful to have competent folks looking at budgets and financial reports who can point me in the right direction. And one of the things that I've been so grateful to Jerry for at Briarwood is a commitment to what we've been calling reality-based accounting that may come up in our conversation, but also the clarity and narrative around budgets so that we know that budgets tell a story and that not everybody is comfortable looking at a spreadsheet. So how do we make those budgets accessible to folks who are not financially savvy? And that is, but still nevertheless have wonderful gifts for leadership. So I think that's a commitment that I have in this process. Thanks, Jerry.
And let me just add to that. I try to keep things kind of simple and kind of straightforward. And I think over 35 years of doing audits and supervising audits and managing audits and being a regional audit manager over more audits, that was one of our challenges every time we wrote an audit report, was to write an audit report to somebody who didn't know anything about accounting, may not know anything about what they were buying. Who knows? So we did have to be very good at telling our story. And some of those audit reports were 300-400 pages long. Of course, a lot of numbers buried in them, not just narrative, but we still had to provide narrative to get the point across. So I think the government served me well in that regard. Okay, before I get into a little bit about budgeting, I just want to do a quick recap of what we've tried to do in the earlier sessions. So in session 1, we talked about our call to life together, and the bishop was on there along with Tom Blaney. And in session 2, which I was fortunate enough to host, We talked about presidents and secretaries and treasurers, oh my, with Stephanie Varnum and Jackie Leach. The third session is, I guess, possibly going to be rescheduled. Attorneys are hard to I guess, grab and get in the same place, but if the attorneys can make it, there'll be a discussion from them sometime on Constitution. Whoops, that's me. And then, as I think this is next week, right, Robert? With Pastor Ernie and Brandon?
Yes, that's the hope. So
Okay.
Yes, we'll communicate more about that.
If they don't do what I did. That will be leading into the future. So that's kind of the couple we've had already and the one coming next. Okay, so I can't see everybody because of the way the screen's set up, but question to each of you. Who has done a budget before? By a show of hands. And I can only see a few hands, but okay, I've done a budget before. And anybody else see all the hands? Robert, can you see more than I can see? I can only see just the side.
No, unfortunately, but
Okay.
a lot of people raise their hands.
Okay, good.
Scroll through here.
Because my argument was going to be, if you say you haven't done a budget, it wouldn't be true. You may not have done a budget for a church, or you may not have done a budget for a place like Briarwood, or you may not have done a budget in a defense agency like I did. But if nothing else, you did a budget at home of some sort. You had to have some plan on how you're going to spend your money. So part of my point is we've all done budgets. May not like doing budgets. I'll be the first to tell you, as much as I've done budgets professionally, we have not had a budget at our household for 25 years. I know what's coming in. I know what's going out, and I don't write it down. I mean, obviously, I have a checkbook and all that, but I have not done a budget at home for a long, long time. I did when it was really tight, years and years and years ago, but I haven't done one for a long time. My basic budgeting at home is I look at the checkbook balance at the end of every month. It's either going up or it's going down. And if it's going down too fast, then I look at why it's going down so fast. That's the example this month. I knew it was going to go down because it had some extra expenses, but it didn't go down any more than I thought. So it was all good. So the next question was, if you've done one, or even if you haven't done one, was it really something to be scared of? And I want to argue it's nothing to be scared of. It is, as Robert said in his use in leadership, in management, in directing things, it's something you have to be aware of and have to be able to rely on, but it's not something to be scared of. In my mind, it's just planning like you would plan anything else. In my way of thinking, if you're going on a trip, you're putting together a plan, you're putting together a budget of sorts. At least I do. I want to know when I think I'm going to get someplace, where I'm going to spend the time. You know, we were just in California last week. So I had in my head already, all right, how many times are we going to eat out? And how expensive is California compared to North Texas? Trust me, I did find out it is a little higher. I will share a quick little anecdote. So I was trying to go get a Subway sandwich while I was watching football games on Saturday. And you had to pay to park to get a Subway sandwich. So Jerry, in his infinite cheapness, did not get a Subway sandwich because I was not going to pay to park to get a Subway sandwich. But my point is, we all do planning, budgeting, whatever you want to call it. So a little bit back to what I've done before. So in the agency I worked for, at all levels through leadership and management, there was not financial budgeting responsibility, but there was workload responsibility budgeting. So from the time I was a supervisor until I retired, I was responsible for the budget of the number of staff years of work and specifically what we were going to get done. So what type of audits we were going to do, where we were going to do them. So while I was relieved of the money side of that, because we had a finance group who did the dollars, I was accountable for how long audits took, when they started, when they ended, make sure we got done what the priorities were. So a lot of budgeting there every single year. Again, I said before, I was treasurer a couple times at Faith. So I was responsible for the budgeting there. Since I've been here, for the first while, I was helping the operations director at the time, who was technically responsible, but we worked together on that. Now it kind of is mine in conjunction with Robert. So I've had a lot of experience. I'm not afraid of them. Just gotta do them. Necessary evil. Whoops. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick little, not overly technical, but rather than just listening to my definitions, I went to find some other definitions. Oh, it did open up. Fantastic. So, and I don't necessarily endorse finance whatever it's called, strategist. I'm not endorsing this website. I just found a place that had some definitions on it that made it nice and straightforward. So I'm not going to read this to you. I'm just going to get a few highlights. Okay, a budget is a financial plan, typically for a year.
Hey, Jerry,
Yes.
we are still viewing the PowerPoint. So you want to maybe stop sharing that and reshare on a different window?
Wow. Okay. I didn't test that would work. Thank you.
Yep.
Let's try this. It's one of the problems. It's hard to practice unless you're actually on the meeting, right?
Yeah.
Let's see if it'll pick it up. Yes, it will. How can you see it?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Okay. Budgets are a financial plan for a specific period. Again, typically a year. Sometimes we used to see budgets at the major defense contractors for up to 5 years. In fact, we kind of encouraged that because the contracts lasted so long. We wanted to get a broader picture than just a year. Can be for a person or for business, can be for great big large business like Lockheed or Boeing, or can be for Briarwood, can be for even something as small as Vita Cristo, which I was the treasurer there too, you know, where we only spend about $25,000 a year. You can do a budget at any level. About in the middle of at least my page now, it consists of analyzing expenses and future income. That's one thing I'll talk about a little bit later, about relying on the past, but knowing what's going to happen in the future, or guessing at least what's going to happen in the future. I like the very first sentence here under this next section of what is a budget. It's essential to goal setting. And I would reverse that too. I think the goal setting is essential to the budget. So Robert and I just discussed getting our budget done for Briarwood for next year. And I said, okay, well, what are our goals? What are our assumptions? What do we plan to do? So they both go hand in hand. You can't just do a budget in the dark, nor can you just set your goals in the dark. So they got to go hand in hand. Not too much more there. And under this section of creating a budget, I kind of like this because I said before, we've kind of all done them. So budgeting on an individual level can be as simple as tracking all sources of income and expenses and making sure that more money is coming in than is going out. That's one thing I've said here. I know the entire time Robert's been here, and I said it before Robert got here. At the end of the day, all that really matters in a nonprofit is there any cash? At the end of the day, we either have cash or we don't have cash. If there's no cash, it's hard to do our ministry. So we'll do the best planning we can, but eventually that's going to be the challenge. All right, I'm going to get out of there for now. That's all I wanted to just give you a little insight of definition of budgets. Can you guys see that again now? PowerPoint?
Yes.
As soon as it expands to. Okay, so here's another question for you guys. Why does the church do a budget? Well, I'm going to tell you why I think the church does a budget, at least within the Lutheran Church and the ELCA. I'm presuming that most of us are using the model constitution as at least the basic basic requirements on our constitutions. So I'm going to show you real quick what the model constitution says, because that'll tell you why we're doing it. Again, I got to go find this, right? Smarter this time. Can you see that? Okay, I've highlighted this, so don't try to read it all. The lawyers should show you more of this some other time. Okay, so powers of the congregation is in chapter 5 at C5.03F. So the congregation approves the annual budget. So there has to be a budget because the congregation has to approve one if you're using this model constitution. Going further down, don't get dizzy. I'm not sure why I highlighted this, but it just talks about who the officers are, and typically president, vice president, secretary, treasurer. So under Congregational Council, paragraph C12.05, the Congregational Council shall be responsible for the financial and property matters of this congregation. Talks about in C there, the Congregational Council may enter into contracts up to a certain value for items not included in the budget. But under D, the Congregational Council shall prepare an annual budget for adoption by this congregation, shall supervise the expenditure of funds in accordance therewith following its adoption, and may incur obligations of more than some dollar amount in excess of the anticipated receipts only after approval by a congregational meeting. The budget shall include this congregation's full indicated share and support of the wider ministry being carried on in collaboration with the synod and the church-wide organization. So that's why we have to have a budget, because the Constitution requires it. I think that's all of that. I hope that's not a surprise to anybody. Okay, now I'm going to get into some kind of topic areas, suggestions, whatever. And I would ask if anybody has a question on any one of these little sub bullets, ask away. Or if you want to wait, we'll do it later, whatever's comfortable with you guys. But just as some suggestions. Start typically, if you're putting the budget together, looking at historical giving or income and historical expenses. So what I'm doing right now out here, I've gone back, I've pulled information back to 2018. Now for us, because 2020 was such an unusual year with the pandemic, it's going to be a bit of a challenge, because I would normally probably look back at the most recent year and use that as a starting point. But that is not going to work very well, depending on, again, what our plans are, what our goals are. So I pulled several years worth of data to try to figure out, okay, maybe part of the ministry will look like 2018, another part might look like 19, another part will look like 20, and I'm gonna have to kind of piece it together. Even if we had had no pandemic and things had gone kind of smoothly over the last 4 years, I would still go back and look at multiple years to look at trends, to look at maybe a certain expense. I would look at the average. If it jumped around, I wouldn't necessarily just take the last year anyway. So in your congregations, I hope you haven't been impacted as badly by the pandemic as we have. So hopefully looking back a few years would give you some insight, especially on the expenses, because that's one thing I've said here at Briarwood, and I've said it when I was doing budgets at Faith Lutheran, and that is the expenses are pretty easy. And for one thing, because a lot of it tends to be salaries and benefits. So whether you have one person on staff or 20 people on staff, you pretty much have a sense of where that's going to go. And since that's driving most of the expenses, to me, it's a lot easier on the expense side. The income side, again, for Briarwood, I mean, we're kind of like a business, right? We have customers. Churches, in my mind, don't have customers per se. They have members that tithe, hopefully, or whatever they do, but you have members that give. It may not always be easy to guess what that giving is going to be for the next year. That's why, to me, it matters to go back to look at several years, because you should be able to see a trend. It may be flat, it may be going down, it may be going up. Hopefully it's not jumping around like a ping pong ball. But hopefully you can place some reliance on looking back at what giving has been in the past. One thing we used to do a lot in my prior life was, again, look for outliers if we're looking at the trend data. And the companies that we audited, of course, on the expense side, they were almost always, I should say, going to estimate the highest number they could, because that was going to become the foundation of the contract values in the future. But invariably, you would see anomalies in there, and you'd find out there was something that's not going to happen again. So the whole purpose of looking backwards is to see where we've been and to see if there's anything in there that may not happen again, and adjust for that. Or if it looks pretty consistent, then you go with that. Second sub-bullet, consider changes for the future. That really matters. I mean, what if you're going to pay your building off? All of a sudden, the mortgage is paid and you don't have any mortgage expense for 2022. I don't know what situations you all are in. Faith Lutheran is not in that place yet. We still do have a significant mortgage. But even in that, there's discussions going on with Mission Investment Fund on renegotiating the loan. And so there's things going on that could affect future cost. What if you're going to hire another person? Or what if you're going to call another pastor? What if Portico comes out and tells us that medical insurance costs are going up by 10%? I don't remember saying what they said is going to go up this year, but I'm sure I've got an email somewhere. Those are things we got to really think about. Kind of linked in the third sub bullet is thinking about what your mission is. I think at a very, very broad, high level, most churches have a similar mission, but when you get down into the details, your mission is going to be different, depending on where you are, depending on who you're serving, depending on the needs of the community. You got to think about your mission, because you can't, in my mind, we can't say the mission is to do, have the best youth program anywhere in the Metroplex, and then we don't fund it. And I've seen a few examples of that at Faith in the past, where we say we're going to do something, but then we don't send any money that direction, and it generally doesn't happen. Unfortunately, all ministry comes with a cost. So definitely think about what you might change in the future, and always stay focused on what your mission is. More suggestions. make sure and focus on the most significant expenses. I said before, I would assume for most of us that's salaries and wages. Maybe mortgage would come next if you have one. Utilities would probably come next, and then probably maintenance. And the reason I'm putting this in here is because we used to spend a lot of time at Faith going over how much money we were going to have for the music program when it was never more than about $5,000 out of a, let's say, roughly $1 million budget. So why, at least from the treasurer's perspective, I don't want to worry about that $5,000. You know, now if that 5,000 needs to be 50, then we need to talk about it. But I didn't like getting into the battles of, well, that 5,000 should be 4,900. Really? I mean, so focus on what matters. And I've said it, this will be the third time now, that the pastors and staff salary, I think, always matters the most. And I am a firm proponent of taking care of the pastor. We had 3 back in the day when I think it was the second time I was treasurer at Faith. And I made certain that we compensated them in accordance with what we felt they were doing. And we felt, you know, they were good, right? So I would argue with the council, if we think our pastors are good, then why aren't we paying them consistent with what we think they're able to do? So I went out and got survey data and did all kinds of work to say, if we've got what we think is a really good pastor, then they need to be up at this range. I'm telling you, those pastors love me because I got them a very substantial raise one year. But the staff salaries matter too, depending on how big a staff you have. We have a lot of other staff at Faith. So I'm used to dealing with, there's probably right now, geez, and I'm not going to count the school staff because they do their own budget, but probably another 10 or 12 people on staff at Faith that aren't clergy. So that all matters too. We've got to pay those people fairly, and we've got to, I hate to say, keep them. We need to, if we want them, we need to pay them enough for them to stay. So focus on those areas for sure. The third little sub bullet, if it is important, it needs to be funded. I mentioned earlier the example of the youth. If you want to have the best youth program in the area, then you got to fund it. You either have to provide people resources, so we've got salaries and wages, or you have to provide other kind of programmatic resources. But if it's important, then it needs to be funded. One thing we've really emphasized at Faith lately is the online presence. Even before the pandemic, we were online probably 5 years ago, roughly. And that has been a high priority at Faith. And because of that, a lot of money was spent on cameras and other equipment and the live streaming stuff. Even basically gutted the sanctuary to redo the front end so that it would be more effective when it got on camera. So if it's important, it's got to be funded, and you got to, you know, come up with some estimates of what that's going to be. Couple more suggestions. Coordinate with your stewardship team if you're doing the budget. As I said before, most of my effort lately has been more stewardship related than finance related. But I don't think you can do them separately. I think it has to be done together. If the finance team is going to come to the congregation and say, hey, we expect to generate 10% more giving, it would seem appropriate for the stewardship team to have an opportunity to weigh in on how it is the stewardship team is going to help make that happen. So, and I would argue vice versa. If the stewardship team has some really good plans on how they're going to really motivate some folks and come up with really good ideas to generate some more income, then that needs to be communicated back to the finance team so they can consider that. So it's got to be, in my mind, got to be done in sync. It can't be done separately. The next little sub bullet, I believe that giving needs need to be communicated and need to be communicated kind of clearly. So on one hand, I'm going to say for my personal giving has nothing to do with the needs. I'm going to give to what I think is appropriate to give based on how I've been blessed. So on one hand, nobody has to tell me anything because I'm going to give based on what I have and based on what I've been blessed with, regardless of the needs. But not everybody is that way. And I remember vividly, growing up in a house where my dad always said, okay, the church needs X number of dollars. And it was a very small church and he was going to give X% of those dollars. No matter what he could give, he was going to give what he thought was his fair share of the total. So if you have people who think that way, then they need to know what the total is my point. You've got to let them know what the needs are. I don't think we do that the best over at Faith. I think sometimes there's a little too much lack of information. Or just not enough information. But I think it's got to be communicated. So that way, either side of your givers can feel comfortable. If they don't need to know, they can ignore it. If they need to know, they'll know. So we've had all kinds of attempts at Faith over the years about, well, we need to raise the budget by X%. And so everybody needs to, pony up 10% more. Use that approach. Well, when that didn't work, okay, well, can everybody do, $10 more a week or whatever, $100 a month, $200, whatever the number. We've gone all kinds of ways around. But the bottom line is people need to know if that's what motivates them with their giving. And I think, this may be the last one of my canned prepared stuff already. Available cash. I mentioned before, in a nonprofit organization, all that really matters at the end of the day is there any money? A classic example, I'll go back to our choir at Faith, which I've been in for many, 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 many years. And every year, the choir director would come to me when I was involved on the finance side. Can I buy more music? Can I buy new choir robes? Can I buy whatever? Can we get the organ tuned? Whatever. And the first would be, can I do it? The second one would be, I know it's in the budget, so I can do it, right? And I would always say, if we have the money. So you cannot spend money you don't have. And so please make sure that everybody has a firm understanding of that there's budgets and then there's what you can do with what you have. And invariably those don't match. And they didn't match when I was managing audits either. Right? Some auditor would come to me and say, hey, we budgeted 1,000 hours for this audit, so I'm going to spend my 1,000 hours. Well, you can't spend 1,000 hours because I need you to spend 200 hours over here on this other audit. So it happens in big government agencies. It happens at churches. We've had the same issue here at Briarwood once in a while, where we budgeted to do something. Okay, but, it didn't come in. So a sub little bullet that I didn't even state here, but I'll state it now. It is kind of important to monitor, not necessarily change the budget, but certainly monitor the budget as time goes by. That's the way you're going to know whether you're staying within the budget and if you're staying within the available cash. So in my prior life, we had to do that every month. Every month we'd go back and say, here's how we're doing compared to what we said we would do. Here, back before the pandemic, when we had a lot easier time of trying to figure out what the budget was going to be, we would go over that at least quarterly. We would go budget to actuals, and then do like a variance analysis. Lately, quite honestly, my input to Robert has been, here is why we spent what we spent. Not so much what was budgeted, but here's what we spent, here's why we spent it, and here's how we're doing. So I think that is the end of my, yes, it is. So questions, feedback, or Robert, you can blast away if you want with questions.
I won't be blasting, but I wonder, Jerry.
That was a positive.
Yeah. But from a finance guy standpoint or finance person standpoint, when you think about the mission of a congregation, part of what prompted us for these conversations too is to say that our budgets are missional documents, right? That you were saying, if you're going to say you want this, then you got to put the budget toward it. You can't have an unfunded mandate in a system as small as an individual congregation, or as large as a synod or a church-wide office. And so it is all about mission in the end. What is the vision and mission and purpose of this congregation, and why are we making the decisions we're making? And one of the things that I didn't hear you talk as much about, you of course talked about staff, and that staffing overhead is huge in most of our communities, but also building maintenance as a challenge. And this is true for Briarwood as it is for many congregations, that the buildings themselves take so much effort and time and money if they're going to be maintained well. And of course, this challenge of putting off deferring maintenance, which then leads to only bigger problems down the road. Could you say a little bit about how you've not just thought about the forward thinking budgeting aspects of improving mission, but making those very responsible, intentional choices to not let things go too much?
I can, and I will speak to what I know the best, which over the faith, it's where I've been for 30 years. So I can't speak to any other congregations in the Metroplex or in the Synod, but we did not do well at that. We had those same conversations over and over and over again in council meetings. And when it was doing budget time, how much are we going to try to put away? Because you have to put it away. You can't just say you're going to do it. You have to literally kind of almost put it in another account, which is kind of what we've done it here at Briarwood in the past. But so we did not do it well, but boy, we had the dialogue. And then unfortunately, what would happen is one of the air conditioners goes out, and we actually had this happen back when we were going through a stage of several interims before Pastor Rusty got there. And I can't remember which interim it was, and it doesn't matter. But the decision was made on a particular Sunday that we're going to show what happens when you don't take care of your stuff. And the air conditioner didn't get fixed on purpose. And it was very warm in the sanctuary that day. And the point was, y'all, we got to do something different. We can't not have money set aside for when these high-priced maintenance things come up. So again, my experience is that we did not do it well. And we are one of the larger congregations in the Synod. One would have thought maybe we could have done it better, but we didn't. But I would agree with Robert. I strongly encourage in that one particular area for sure. And there's no doubt that it's not just pay me now or pay me later. It's pay me now or pay me a whole much more later. And especially like an air conditioner in the middle of summer, it's no different at a church than it is in your house. You're going to pay premium just to get people out there in the first place, right? And then the hardware is going to be more expensive. So yes, by all means, having some sort of reserve, I guess is the best term to put on it from a financial perspective, but have a reserve available to cover not only, not only maintenance, but other kind of emergencies as well. That's important. I would agree.
Cool. Well, I think we have a small enough group that we can just open up for conversation now. And I encourage y'all to unmute yourselves when you'd like to speak, and we'll see how that works for us. Jerry, can you stop sharing your screen so we can
Yes.
get everybody up on the screen?
Thank
All
you.
right. Janice, yeah, you don't even have to raise your hand. I said just jump on in there.
Okay.
Hi, Janice.
Well, I like that you say that the budget is your missional document. I think that's something that's overlooked a lot in that process. But then what does it say when you present that missional document to the congregation based on, you know, the historical looking at the giving on the income and, you know, doing due diligence on the expense side, and you're presenting a budget with a significant deficit? What does that reflect and say about your mission for your ministry to the congregation?
Janice, could you say a little bit about where you're from and you know, just
Well,
let people know?
I'm from Central Lutheran, and I'm treasurer there and have been for about 18 years. So yeah, in the process of working on our current budget, you know, as with most churches, our giving has significantly continued on a downward trend, and we have stripped our expenses to the bare minimum. We do have an aging facility. We are trying to be forward thinking in some of the maintenance for that, for what we budget for what we know is probably coming within the next 12 to 24 months. But, and currently Pastor Robert is our bridge pastor because we're in the call process along with the merger. But yeah, I mean, how do you correlate or justify such a deficit in your budget for your primary missional document for the church?
I'll speak back to Briarwood first. That's one of the things that we've changed since Robert has been here, because we would do the same thing. We would always have a budget that showed a deficit. And then we would, well, we're going to do our best to make it up. And frankly, I never thought that made any sense, but you know, I did what I was asked to do. Now we put the numbers together, as Robert used the term earlier, kind of more of a reality based. Here's the truth, I guess is the best way to say it. I don't think we should do anything but the truth with numbers, because numbers can be manipulated so easily. I understand that people have different opinions on numbers. I'm not saying you can't look at the same number and have a different opinion on it. But I've been very careful here to say, look, here's the reality. This is where we are. There is no more expense to cut. If we are going to continue the mission as it is, or whatever we think it's going to be, then this is what we have to do. We have to find ways to generate the revenue. I still think it's harder in the congregation because you've only got, you got people that, I say harder and sometimes not harder. You got people that give every week or month or whatever they do, but you only got so many. Now, Briarwood, we can, you know, try to, hate to say the word, drum up business, but we can try to find sources of revenue. I don't know really too much how to do that in a congregation, except I will say, I'll give you an example of Faith Lutheran. So we have been leasing or renting, whatever the right term is, our Family Life Center to the YMCA for quite a while now. And there's kids over there playing basketball or indoor soccer or volleyball, whatever they're doing. Seems like almost every night of the week, almost to the point of, you know, I can't find a place to park to go to choir practice. So we have used that as finding another source of revenue. I don't think it's a ton, but it helps. We have a field that we don't use that's completely undeveloped, there's a soccer field there now, and there's a soccer team that pays us a little bit to use that. So we have found some other sources of revenue. We've also really pushed hard on our day school to, they're kind of our cash cow at the moment. And not that everybody can have that benefit, but we have a pretty large school and a staff that's been there for a long, long time, and a director that's been there for even longer. So I think they're pretty darn successful. So we're able to generate revenue from there that can help support the other costs within church. But at the end of the day, I think, and we've done this same thing at Faith, where there'll be a, the budget will say, whatever, just a round number, $1.4 million, we only expect $1.2 million. So we expect a shortfall of $200,000. And it's like, well, then why isn't the budget $1.2 million? That's what I always say. Let's get the budget in line with what we think the income's going to be. But it's always been the other way. The challenge has always been, okay, you guys need to step up. But even at a church as large as Faith, there's still only so many people. And I keep arguing, I can't continue to raise and raise and raise and raise my own personal giving forever, because eventually, I think I'm fairly generous, but at some point that's going to stop because, I've got limits too. So I think it's a horrible challenge. And I hate to say I don't have an answer for you.
I know there's not an answer. So, I mean, I knew
Yeah.
that when I asked it, and we're similar to what you're doing at Faith, because we've been, the term we use is a licensing fee for our sanctuary. So we've, had significant income from an Anglican church, now from a Seventh-day Adventist. But my point to the council was, if you look at the reality of it and you're relying on an income source from a third party and not from within, then what does that say about the mission of your own church? Because like you said, there's only so many, butts in the pew are good, but there's only so many of those that are going to give. And in our case, like most, we have an older congregation. Those are your givers typically, and they're dying off and they're not being replaced.
Well, and one could argue that sometimes the older they get, they are more generous, but they're probably having, like they have less money than they had when they were working, more than likely, unless they have a really good retirement. So you're getting hit kind of a double whammy there. But the words you are saying, Janice, is the words that our pastor kind of sends out to the congregation. If you want to be the church that you're telling me you want to be, then step up and pony up. Those are my words, not his, but he's pretty much puts the challenge out because he wants to be a missional church and he wants us to do things that are good. But he understands full well that means we have to be willing to support it.
I guess the other side to that, though, is at what point do you start pushing the issue? Because I've quantified, the timeline that there is left for the church if it's on a continued trend. Now, with the merger, Bethany has a child development center. So, it's yet to be determined. That may help offset some. But at what point then do you start taking the approach that you may need to, whether or not you truly can continue?
So Jerry, I won't, I'll intervene a little bit on that point, just to say that is a reality facing not many, but several congregations in the NTNL Synod. It may not be in your particular congregation that others of you may be attending, but there are times in congregational lives where people need to take stock, and financial realities are often the most effective way to get to those questions.
Because it's not so much about, your own church surviving at this point. And as a CPA, I can't believe I say these things now because I've always been about numbers, but it's more about what God's mission is and the best use of those resources.
That's right. Yes.
I like those words. I like those
see
words.
Linda Ness from our Mission Endowment Fund responding well to that. Yeah, it's about God's mission in this place, and that discernment is part of financial leadership in our congregations. It does start with mission and vision. It starts with discerning God's purposes in these places. It's not merely about maintaining what has been and raising enough money to maintain and conserve what has been. It is about moving forward into the world in the way God is leading us. And as we all know, that means transition and change, which can be scary in certain types of communities, none represented here, of course, in this conversation.
But others much like us.
Right. And so these are frightening things to discuss, but very often it's those financial realities that lead to a stock taking, that lead to that discernment. I want to see if there are other topics that can, maybe related topics that can be raised in this conversation as well. Linda, I already acknowledged your presence. You are a chief financial leader in our synod now, and have been deeply involved with the financial realities of the synod and with congregational lives. Do you have anything to add into this conversation?
Takes about 3 clicks to get unmuted. I think I have never put a budget together for a congregation. I've certainly worked with the budget with the Mission Endowment Fund and a personal budget and other areas, but it's really hard to look, and I'm aware of what the Synod budget looks like as well, but it's really hard to look at a budget with the numbers, and that's what the treasurers do, and then discern what is the ministry, what is the mission, what is the gospel that's in these numbers, how is that showing through? And if you look at your budget and you don't see that, then there are some difficulties. One of the things that I know happens within congregations is that they will set the budget, and with limited finances, they can't cover everything that they want to do. They can't cover the ministry that they want to provide into the community. And so they'll do separate campaigns to ask for funding for those special events or occasions or opportunities. And people give pretty freely when they have something special with a good story behind it that they will support with their money. So that is a good additional way to fund things that are purely missional within your congregation itself. And the responsibility of the Mission Endowment Fund is to acknowledge worthy projects and ministries within our congregations that are underfunded, where we are able to give them an opportunity to put those ministries in place. So this is outside funds that are coming in. I never want to think of it as a band-aid of saving a congregation, because that is not the purpose of these funds. There's twofold to the purpose. There are congregations that have taken on a ministry that is beyond their financial capability of putting these ministries together because of their size. One of those congregations has a feeding ministry that they support, and they feed more members in the community than go to their church. So we are so happy to support the ministries of that kind, because that is truly a presence within that community. And the other thing that we like to support in congregations are things that are not in the budget, but they are very good and creative and sometimes new ministries that congregations are inspired to do. And it's usually a parishioner. It's not going to be the pastor. The pastor may start the buzzword, but it usually comes from a parishioner. But they don't have the funds in the budget, so they can't get that ministry started. If we can provide the funds for them to start that ministry, support them the first year, maybe support them the second year, and many of these ministries that we supported become self-sustaining on their own. So that's where I can see you've got your budget. Where's the mission in that budget? And if you know that part of that mission is in that budget, but there's also mission outside of that budget that also takes money, then how will you find ways to get the support that you need? Because you don't want to just pay the lights. You don't want to just hang on. You don't want to do without the air conditioner for sure. But where is the ministry? How will you provide that with the finances that you have available? And it doesn't have to come only from the people that are in your pew.
Thank you so much, Linda, for that insight from your broad perch of leadership in this synod, and the word of encouragement too, of what mission and vision can be. Did you want to say something?
It's a pure joy to see how the variety of projects and ministries develop within these congregations, and to be able to have the funding from the NTNL. We're very blessed to have that. It's just significant to the life of these congregations. So it's my joy to be a part of that.
Fantastic.
And Robert, can I add a little bit?
Of course you
On top of
can.
what Linda said, I think is really good. One of the things we've tried to do at Faith last 2 or 3 years, when it comes time to do the budget, is from the stewardship perspective, we make a list of all the things that are being done. I'm not talking about the routine things. I mean, I'm not talking about having communion or having a choir. I'm talking about all the outreach stuff that's done at Faith. And we say, look, these are the things that we've accomplished. This is the mission that we've done to try to motivate people, back to your point, Linda, of, hey, they might give to this, they might give for this. So I've made that list a couple times, and it's remarkable even to me, because I'm there all the time and I still don't really think that all these things we're doing until I look back at the various weekly newsletters and such that says, oh, by the way, we did this, we did that. And when you make up a list like that, it can get pretty impressive. And that can motivate people to say, oh, well, I thought I was only paying for the electricity or the air conditioning. No, you're paying because we help out CCA. You're paying because we go to 2 assisted living places every Sunday to do worship. Oh, I didn't know we were doing that. Oh, good, now you know. So that might be one bit of advice, is to kind of remind yourself of all the things you're doing that's outside the walls. Because I think, to your point, people aren't excited to support what's going on necessarily inside, but they may be really excited to support what's going on outside the 4 walls. So,
And those are symbiotic, right? Well, they rely on each other.
absolutely.
Right. Well, is there anyone else who'd like to jump into the conversation at this point? I could only see the people who have their cameras on.
You know, because if not, I can pull up my budgeting spreadsheet here and you can help me work on the Briarwood budget for a few minutes.
Oh, joy, Jerry. That's
Well, Janice might at least like it.
So I wonder, yeah, are there other ideas coming up from this conversation? What was it helpful for you in this conversation to hear this phrase, reality-based budgeting? Is that a helpful concept for you? Some congregations, you inherit systems, right, and cultures around finance and budgeting. And have you gone through a process of changing how you do your budgeting, your accounting in your community? Because those are important culture shifts too, when those happen. Not seeing too many people jumping at that topic, but no, I think that this is such a core function, right, of how councils operate in our congregations, and in such a vital function for leadership as a whole. For those of you who are in financial leadership positions in your council, and Janice, I know you are for sure, have you experienced resistance from other leaders when you're presenting okay, here's my take on this situation, and people who just don't want to take numbers seriously in their leadership, or how have you handled those situations?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there has definitely in the past, because this isn't the first time we've been in this position, but yeah, there's been not only resistance, but denial of what the situation is. You know, even when you quantify it into X number of months on the current trend, they, you know, sometimes in the past, you know, in front of the congregational meeting will tell you, well, you, the treasurer, don't have faith. You know, God will provide. And, you know, then you have to respond. God also gave us a brain to think and to act and make these decisions. And again, I mean, you can only do so much with the expenses. And once you've done that, it's up to the members to step up or not and support the church. So as far as the council goes, I would say, yeah, more often than not, there's just the head in the sand approach from them. Well, you know, I'm not the money person, so not sure what you're saying, even though you're saying we don't have the money or we're going to run out. I don't want to deal with that.
Right. Jerry, I know that you've dealt with that before too. And
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
I was going to share another story, but it's a secondhand story, if that's okay. So my older brother was the treasurer at his church down near Tampa, Florida, for quite a while. And one of the changes he made was they were not supporting the synod down there very well. They were supporting the synod with whatever was left. And he got in there, and after some significant challenge with other council members, and said, look, we need to have a plan. We are going to increase our giving to the synod. And I forget the exact numbers, but I know they went from like 3% to 5% to 7%. And I don't remember if they got away. His goal was 10, so that they were tithing to the synod. I don't know that they got all the way to 10, but he got it where he wanted it to be, despite the resistance. And in the end, everybody was really happy. But it did take, you know, some guts, for lack of a better way to put it, to put that challenge in front of them. And by doing it, you know, they were able to accomplish, and I'm sure they all felt a lot better when they were doing more giving than holding on to. So.
Yeah, those are, again, that's a commitment to mission, not just in your individual congregation, but what God is doing throughout broader structures, right? And of course, the funds that are raised at congregations, the portion that is given onto the synod, a portion of that is then given onto our church-wide organization, and then a portion of that is given over to the Lutheran World Federation and to our many global ministries. And I think that most ELCA congregations don't have a full comprehension of what we together accomplish in the world, right? We don't spend a lot of time talking about that in my experience in congregations. We don't say that the money that is given in our tithes and offerings in your Sunday collection helps fund cancer treatment for Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, the only Palestinian source of cancer treatment, that people come from Gaza into Jerusalem to visit a Lutheran hospital. And that is in part because of your giving. Now that is a direct relationship. And we don't often speak in those terms. So, you know, I think that we have so much that we're involved in, so much that we're supporting directly, and we so often don't tell our story, which I think is related to an ELCA hesitation to strongly proclaim the gospel of love, inclusion, and validation and equity that we come by naturally, and that our society needs so desperately. We have this wonderful, wonderful message, and we do hide it under a bushel basket so often. And at the same, and that takes money, but we also don't say, hey, by the way, when you give, you're giving to so much more than just keeping the lights on in this congregation.
Yeah, I think to piggyback on that from a congregational leader side, the synod, let's just the NTNL, since that's where we are, you're right, doesn't communicate well enough with the churches and the congregations, because when you talk about budgeting for giving to the synod, most often they're thinking, well, we're covering the expenses at the synod. They're not thinking of some of the missions that you just mentioned. They're not thinking globally. They're thinking, well, we're just covering the salaries of the bishop or whatever. And then they also come back with, well, what does the synod do for us, the church?
Mm-hmm.
I think more communication from the synod, not just to the congregational leaders, but to the congregations somehow, either, on-site visitations or something, to discuss some of what you just mentioned, would really open the eyes to a lot of the members of the church. They have no idea of where those monies are spent, and that it is on it has global impact.
Right. Linda, did I see you wanted to jump back in there? Because we are almost at time. We want to respect that tonight.
I'm not sure it's timely now, but my congregation at one time presented 2 budgets. I don't know if anybody else has done this before. And one of them was, did you call it reality-based budget? And the other one, I think they were calling the dream budget. And they said, if you just give this much, this is what we can do. But if you can bring it up to here, this is what we're going to do. And I think that it was effective enough, because my church has never gone under yet. But maybe not quite as effective as if those stories, Janice and Robert, if those stories had been given along with the dream. What is the dream? And it's very difficult. The ELCA and the NTNL do incredible things on behalf of the members that are sitting in the pew in the congregations that they're not aware of. But to get their attention, the material's out there, but you have to go find it, and you have to be motivated to go find it. To have somebody deliver it to you would be very helpful. But how can you get the attention of the congregants on a Sunday morning to share that message along with your communion and your sermon and your choir? So it is very difficult to get that message across to ears that are ready to listen. But yes, the stories are powerful stories. They're out there. They're motivational.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that takes us, in addition to lay leadership, to our pastors, right? The pastors who do have the authority of speaking on Sunday mornings and other venues. And we need to remind our pastors of these things as well. So it's a full spectrum effort, right? And maybe that's what I'm taking away from this evening's conversation. And I see that Rhonda has seconded this point about speaking. How do we communicate, and what is it that we're communicating? Jason is our Synod communicator, and so maybe we can have some conversations about that, what that looks like for our churches in the future, and what as we emerge out of this pandemic, hopefully, as we reach this new stage of mission and vision in our communities as a whole. How do finances fit into that? How do we speak more openly and transparently and plainly about money and its necessity in our congregational lives and our synodical and church-wide lives? Not dance around the subject like we're saying something taboo or we need to be afraid of. Jerry's like, I'm not afraid of that. Well, we shouldn't be. but we so often act like we are, right? And so as we come to the close of our time this evening, I very much want to thank Jerry for this presentation. It was a very clear, systematic presentation this evening. And I want to thank each of you for sticking with this series, for coming back after Thanksgiving here in the midst of Advent and having these conversations about finances in the church. We do hope to join next week for a closing session. Most likely a closing session of this series. And again, these are being recorded and shared throughout our synod so others can join the conversation at different times. And I see Pastor Paul has put on that camera. Good to see you, Paul. Well, blessings to each of you this evening. Thanks again for your participation, not just your presence, but your participation in this time together and the contributions you make to your congregation and to this synod as a whole. Blessings to each and every one of you. Good night.